Yo, what is up, guys? Snap here. Today we're going to be going over all of the builds for the 325 Settlers of Culler expansion. Today's going to be quite a big one. We have a new support in the form of a Crybot. We have changes to the Culler with brand new pathing and gear. We have a big modification to the Aurabot as a result of all of the nerfs. Fan favorite BAMA is returning with some modifications. As always, I'm putting timestamps down in the description, so if you want to go to a particular build, a particular topic, just go down there. You can scrub through the timestamps. We got a lot to go over, so let's jump right into it. So first things first, our main carry build that we're going to be playing in 325 is going to be once again BAMA, which is blink arrow, mirror arrow. There's a couple reasons for this. One of them is obviously with the nerf to hatred. Anything that wasn't scaling off of fizz is going to be a lot worse when you have an Aurabot, because you're now unable to leverage an additional aura in the form of hatred. So stuff like Spark, while still very strong, got hit a little bit in the hatred department. And honestly, the damage of BAMA is just so sky high for what you put into it in terms of costs that it's just a very, very good choice for us here. We played this build last league. It performed, above our expectations. The damage is just so high. And so this is the carry build we're going to be going for the next expansion because it really wasn't changed on the patch. There is one patch note that was relevant to blink arrow, mirror arrow, and that was the elemental arrows fired from prismatic blink or mirror arrow clones now only deal damage of the chosen element similar to elemental hit. Now this might sound like a big nerf. However, if you were a pure elemental build, it was already behaving this way. This change was targeted at builds that were adding additional chaos damage on top of their elemental damage. Because for some reason, if you added chaos damage to this skill, even though it had chosen an element, the chaos damage would persist, which means you could play a poison build with BAMA, which was a very popular solo build last league. However, if you're a pure elemental build, it basically already behaved this way. And since we aren't adding a bunch of chaos damage to our hits, this change really didn't affect this build at all. So after the hatred nerfs, if you're in single target clear links, you're at 8.4 billion DPS in a 6-man, or if you're using more clear oriented links, it's sitting right around 6.2 billion. The numbers of this before the hatred nerf was right around 14 billion for single target and like 10 or 11 million for the clear links. So you lost a good chunk of your damage, but this is more than enough to shit on all content in the game, so I'm not that concerned about it. Just quickly going over some of the important bits of this build. You are wearing a Speaker's Wreath so that you aren't killing stuff with your minions. That way you can enable the culling setup. It's using Lionize for the far shot keystone as well as the cannot be evaded. This means you don't need to invest at all into minion accuracy, which can be a hard stat to get. Additionally, far shot is a really crazy multiplier that you can take advantage of, and just having the more multiplier on the weapon and then you leverage all the flat damage that an Aurabot gives you results in some pretty high damage. Using Fleshcrafter to ignore penetration as well as a strangle grasp so that you can anoint minion damage nodes that are on the timeless jewel here, the elegant hubris, converting all of its damage to a cold so that we have strong freezes that we can take advantage of for the Culler. And then it has the Mother's Embrace flask belt so that we can apply a bunch of strong flasks to our minions here, getting a ton of multi from the grand spectrums as well as the fresh meat support. This support is honestly one of the most crazy supports in the entire game. Gives you crit chance, adrenaline, base crit, and crit multi all for one support. This thing is just really crazy. Some of the adjustments we made from the last iteration of this build was that we are trying to fit on a way to do less recovery maps. And the way you do that is you shift your ascendancy node over to Bone Barrier, and then you path down here to the Ghost Reaver Keystone so that it leeches ES instead of life, and then you convert that into instant leech so that you can bypass the map mod. Additionally, we jammed a little bit more suppression on this build via the Lucky Mastery here, and then you just get Cluster Jewels here giving you a bunch of increased damage as well as attack and cast speed here. Those are the main adjustments to the carry that we've ran from last league. Other than that, it's just going to be mostly the same build as we played from the Necropolis League, except for a little bit less damage because we no longer have the OP hatred aura. Anyways, let's move on to the Aurabot adjustments that we've had to make here as a result of all of the nerfs. So first things first, of course, hatred just got its more cold damage modifier deleted. So in order to leverage hatred, you need to be a fizz skill that is gaining fizz as cold. Defiance banner just basically straight up got deleted along with the other banner skills. They're now reworked to do some other stuff. There are cases in which you'd want to use a banner if you're doing a stationary activity, but if you're doing just general mapping and you're moving around a ton, I don't see a huge incentive to use these. So going over the generic pathing we have here, I'm going still once again to aim for the wide pathing around down here to the Marauder tree, and then down here to grab Champion of the Cause with manual pathing down here. The reason for that is because this Timeless Jewel in the Marauder socket is typically cheaper than other popular sockets like Templar or even up here. So if you path all the way around, you generally have more access to timeless jewels, and that's where you get a lot of your aura effect. The timeless jewel aura effect is very important because we are not allowed to use the new Hands of Phrygia gloves because we are supporting minions. If you're supporting minions, obviously you can't link to them all, so you have to use Valkyries, which is the next best alternative. One thing to mention here is that with the return of Dark Marionettes, many people will opt to go to those with a Guardian's Blessing in order to get their last aura up. However, if you are in a 6-man and you're running a Culler, those will kill the mobs and therefore is incompatible with a Culler. So your main bet is going to still be equipping the March of the Legion boots so that you can get a super high level hatred. It still adds a lot of damage even though it was nerfed. Plus, it gives you a lot of levels on your smite as well as your flesh and stone that you're going to jam in here. As you can see, putting them in the boots here gives these a massive +9 as well as a massive +9 to your Vol smite. Some other highlights on the gear here is I've chosen to go with geodesic rings here. These bases are quite cheap and you can just Crusader Exalt them to get the influence on, and then you use dense fossils to get the energy shield until you roll attributes, and then you craft minus mana cost. You obviously don't have to get these on a geodesic ring base. You can get these on an amethyst base, is really good. You can also get this on an unset base to help with the socket pressure a little bit. Standard chest piece here, just getting aura effect, and then whatever int and or maximum ES you can get on the prefixes. I've chosen to go with a non-synth helmet because it's hard to hit the breakpoint for the last percent max res if you do not have a really GG timeless jewel. So I'm just going with a RMR helmet instead. Additionally, with the new support, it is giving us a lot more max res than we had before, so it's not absolutely necessary to hit that last breakpoint for the last max res. But Tua Tapuna, nothing to say here. Jinx Juju, also nothing to say here. And then of course we have the Tides of Time, which simply just lets us replace Pathfinder Ascendancy whenever you're able to get the belt. You just swap it over to Champion to get that little bit of extra aura effect. One other quirky thing you might see here is that we actually have a life flask and a Sorrow of the Divine. The reason for this is I am going to make every single member of the party able to do less recovery maps. And essentially the only way you can do this on supports is to equip a Sorrow of the Divine to make your life flask apply to ES, and then you need to get an instant flask in order to bypass the less recovery rate. And because the flask is instant, you can still recover your ES. So you do have to give up 2 flask slot in order for this technology to work, but it allows you to run another map mod that you previously couldn't run before, and expanding your map pool is everything, especially when trying to juice endgame maps in a party. You do drop your overflowing chalice as well as your quicksilver, but it's going to be okay because you do get some movement speed back from other members in your party, and there's some special pathing here to get 100% uptime on the core skating elixir. The pathing I've gone to here was to drop the intuitive leap in this socket for a RMR jewel. So you get an extra jewel, which is an extra slot for RMR. And then all of the extra decks you're pathing to here, you're going to convert with tattoos into flask effect duration. You can also take this last point here for an extra 10% charges gained. And with all of that, you do indeed have 100% uptime on the flask. It might be a little bit sketchy if you have perhaps a less flask map. And in that case, you might want to try and hot swap an overflowing chalice for one of your other flasks if you notice it, but I don't feel it is a huge deal. I didn't really notice the minus flask maps last league when I was playing this particular pathing with no overflowing chalice, so I think it's just fine. Last thing to note here on adjustments to the Aurabot is that we of course squeezed in a flesh and stone here. So because you are dropping your Defiance banner, you get a little bit of extra RMR back, and because you're no longer running a synth helm, you get an extra RMR on the implicit. You can now fit in a flesh and stone. Last thing is I put Frostblink of Wintry Blast in as my main movement skill. I think this is super nice when you have a ton of cast speed, which Aurabots do just because they're an Aurabot. This just lets you fly around the map. It also compensates for your lack of Quicksilver because of your flask setup. If you can get this alt gem here, you should definitely do so. But yeah, those are a bunch of the main adjustments to the Aurabot. We just kind of ate some nerfs with Determ, with Grace, with Hatred, some of the more powerful auras, but you're not really adjusting a whole lot. It's just a straight up nerf. There aren't really changes you're making as a result of it. You do need to be cognizant of what auras you're running, however, because Hatred is no longer useful unless you're playing a fizz-based skill that you can gain off of. And it's going to be honestly a joke to build Aurabots because if you're not running a fizz skill and you can drop Hatred, your RMR requirements go down a ton, which means that you're probably going to be able to go CI a lot easier if you're not having to run Hatred. So if you're running Spark or something like that, which is a primary lightning skill, going CI earlier is going to be very, very tempting. Additionally, if the new Simulacrum changes go through and we see voices earlier than we have in prior leagues because of the wave changes, getting those voices earlier is going to be another incentive for you to maybe go CI early. So look to go CI earlier maybe than prior leagues if you don't need to run Hatred. 100. Dropping that 50 aura is going to be very big. But that's enough yapping about the Aurabot. Let us debut the brand new replacement to the curse bot, which is going to be a Crybot. This character is a mashup of the previous character that I built, which was the Spectre Necromancer. You can view that video here. I'll put a link to this in the description. But after the patch, there were some huge changes to war cries and specifically endurance charges that required a huge pivot of that build. Now, we are using a lot of the same technology from that build from the Wraith Lord, including all of the bubble specters. All of that stuff is making a return, but we are jamming a ton of extra stuff onto this build that the other character didn't do. So conceptually, this character has a Wraith Lord with a very high specter count from the gem, as well as the tree, which is anointed from the amulet here, and it is summoning a bunch of utility minions. Now, in the notes of the build, I have put all of the relevant specters that you could summon to buff your party. We are most likely going to be doing some number of Undying Evangelists for a bunch of proximity shields, and maybe jamming in 2, maybe 3 of these other specters, which can up the damage or defenses of your party in other ways. A lot of the Affliction specters have had their auras nerfed, so I'm not planning on including all of the Affliction specters here, but if some of the auras get in unscathed, then I will include them here in the POB. So that's great. You summon a bunch of minions with a bunch of proc shields. Now that's obviously very OP. You also get a little bit of damage from maybe the other specters. Additionally, there's some serious endurance charge stacking going on here. Characters grabbing endurance charges from the tree here and then all the way down here as well. It's wearing 2 Calm Sign rings for an additional +2, an additional +1 on the boot corrupt here for a grand total of 9 endurance charges. Now you can share all of those endurance charges to the rest of your team via ambush charge. This has quite a large radius. It's around 80 to 90 units. It covers most of the screen, so it is a very favorable AoE. And this shares all of those endurance charges that you put on your tree, gives them to all of your teammates. And with the recent endurance charge buffs on the patch, this is going to give you a significant amount of DR, elemental, and physical. Now, previously there was a problem with introducing endurance charges to group build, and that is if you click an altar that has the endurance charge mod, your source of recovery would turn off. There is a line that is 20% reduced recovery rate of life mana in ES per endurance charge. But as I mentioned on the Aurabot, we are making an extra effort to jam in this flask combo, Sorrow of the Divine and the Eternal Life Flask, so that when we hit that altar mod, we still have a source of recovery for everybody. So we can benefit from the substantial amount of DR without having to worry about the altar mods. Additionally, as I mentioned before, you get to run all of the map mods with less recovery now. This character is life-based, so it does not need the Sorrow of the Divine. It simply just needs a life flask with instant recovery. So we got the minions, we got all the endurance charges, and then of course we are going to be introducing the new OP war cries onto this build. Here is a list of all of the buffs that the new war cries can provide your party. We're going to be using 5 of them, which is going to be max res on ancestral, base crit on battle mages, life regen on enduring, movement speed on intimidating, as well as more armor on seismic. Additionally, there's fizz as fire, and then 35% damage of main hand on rallying, but we aren't using those because we are so socket starved on this build. Additionally, we cannot use fire damage because of the culling condition on the helmet. All of these war cries are cast at max power because of the red blade banner, so they're always going to have their max effect. Additionally, we have substantial duration investment on the tree as well as in the gem links here. These war cries last for 11 seconds and they have around a 1 second cooldown because of the massive investment we have on war cry CDR. Total of 6.85 here, which is just enormous. All of that is coming from, of course, tattoos. There are war cry cooldown tattoos here. We have a couple clever setups, including a Might of the Meek, which is giving you even more CDR. We're pathing to a bunch of the war cry wheels as well. Conveniently, this gives you a bunch of life, which is why we're building this as a life-based character. And then we take a cluster jewel to give us intimidate as well as the increased armor for the personal defenses on this character. You chaos cap with the rest of the cluster jewels here. Being life-based isn't really a problem here. It does have 4.5k life with pet blood, of course, so this thing is going to be a huge brick. You look at the rest of the gear, you might notice some other stuff. It is also cursing enfeebled temp chains on blasphemy here. The boots give it a lot of AoE. It gives you the extra curse. It also helps you cap your res, so the boots here are going to be super good. So we got minions, we got endurance charges, we got war cries, we got curses, and then we also have the Calm's Binding, which is giving you 25% fizz to fire. This helps the whole entire party mitigate fizz damage and also has a gigantic AoE, contributing to the massive defensive layers we have. And after all of this stuff, we are still not done with all of the things that this character provides to the party. It, of course, is going to be benefiting from the new champion fortified changes. You can now give Fortify to your whole party just for existing. There is some investment on the tree you can do to get more sources of max Fortify, but generating that Fortify is another question. I think there is currently a little bit too much squeezed on this character to go for the max Fortify investment, but it is an avenue you can go down to trade some of the other stuff off. So we have the Fortify on the Ascendancy as well as the other taunt stuff. If you are unaware, all of the war cries that this character is casting is also automatically taunting the enemies. Any enemy hit by a war cry is inherently taunted. This gives you another 20% less damage with hits, as well as 10% personal DR. And then on top of that, all of those enemies are taking a 20% increased damage. I mean, this character is just stacked, right? Not only are you immortal because of all of the bubbles you're spawning from the specters, you're carrying all of the endurance charges, you're carrying the curses, you're carrying all the war cries, you're carrying the fizz to Ellie. It just simply does it all. And quite honestly, this character contributes more to your defenses than a Mana Guardian does in the third slot of the party. I'll talk about this a bit more in the section where I talk about potential 3, 4, 5 man, but you should honestly in a 3 man or 4 man be replacing your Mana Guardian with this exact character because the defenses it provides are just simply superior. But let us not forget about the Mana Guardian. It is going to be the next build we are going over. Now, Mana Guardian is a really cool one in that, once again, I don't really have a bunch of updates for this POB for you. This character is simply super optimized, and quite frankly, unless there's some really crazy changes to like gear or uniques or something like that, is going to look very, very identical to what we played in leagues past. The same pathing over here, get a timeless jewel if you can, go all the way around, convert all of this stuff to max mana, and then convert all of the Scion life wheel to max mana via a healthy mind. And then at the very end, you jam in split personalities for massive int mana. Also the main link carrier, if you're unaware, Soul Link is just a massive DR layer, giving you 30% damage from hits taken from your ES by teammates, and then also 17% less damage for your teammates that you're linked to. So yeah, very OP. Somebody has to wear it. Unfortunately, it's the Mana Guardian, so try to be nice to him. Some adjustments you might see here. The flask setup is going to be a little bit different here because, as I mentioned before, everybody needs a source of recovery in the no recovery maps because of the altars as well as the map mod. So once again, we are jamming on a Sorrow of the Divine with an instant life flask, so we have a source of recovery on those maps. Aegis Aurora can contribute to those recovery because it is an instant recovery when you block, but it's not quite enough to run those maps comfortably, so having the flasks here is going to help a ton. Now, the problem you're going to run into is that you don't have the mana sustain to run your links on the no regen maps or the less recovery maps. You can solve this via a mana flask, but ideally you're not dropping one of your Ellie flasks here. You can solve this by using one of the new enchants, which is going to be 100% reduced soul gain prevention on the dagger. This is a new base exclusive to the Lee mechanic, and if you are able to get this reduced soul gain prevention, you can then use Clarity to solve all of your mana problems, therefore not having to drop a flask, and then you can keep all of your links up in any map mod. Additionally, we have dropped the supplementary mine setup that we had here before because we are now able to cap the mines on just the miner, and so you can fit in a little bit of additional utility in the form of Frost Shield. You can still use the Stormbind spell totem setup that I recommended in my previous video here. It is quite nice if you're doing stationary activities like Blight or Ultimatum, that kind of thing, to reduce the movement speed of mobs. It's just something to throw on if you have the sockets here. Other than that, there isn't a ton of adjustments to the Mana Guardian here, so let's move on to something a little bit more interesting, and that is going to be the brand new Culler we've cooked up here. So this is the Culler. This is what it looks like. It kind of looks like we just chose random uniques, you know, like on a roulette wheel, and we just threw it on, but this is efficient. This is currently what you're wearing in 2024 POE. So first off, obviously all sources of quant were removed off of gear, so the next best thing, of course, is to equip rarity on every slot. You are going to be able to get a lot of your quant back specifically from the Horned Scarab of Glittering, in that you're going to get 100% quant for this. So now you're going to have to pay the scarab and or slot tax every map to get that quant that you lost back, as well as a little bit of additional rarity. But on the character itself, the only thing you can really invest in is going to be a ton of rarity. You also might immediately see that we have a Cloak of Tamar Ailion. While the rarity investment is very good, we are hitting a point of diminishing returns from all of the rarity we're stacking, as well as all of the rarity on the Horned Scarab here. I think with Recombinators coming back, there is a ton of value to extract out of those dropped magic items, because as you know, with Recombinators, blue items have value. If you drop blue weapons with +1 to spell or +1 to whatever, frankly, those have value. And so dropping a little bit of rarity from Greed's Embrace in exchange for Cloak of Tamar Aili so that we are extracting value out of those blue items is a very good trade in my opinion. So let's go over a few of the changes here. Now, you might notice we are no longer using Wind Ripper. We're going to be using Chimeria's Avarice for the rarity, as well as the Wheel of the Stormsail for the rarity as well. This rolls 40 rarity plus 40 if they're frozen for a total of 80, which is actually higher than Wind Ripper is. Wind Ripper is 30 and 30 for a total of 60. So this combo provides you a higher total amount of rarity given that the mobs are frozen, which they are because we are converting all of our BAMA minions to cold so that we can freeze better. We got a rarity helmet here, which is not too interesting. Also a rarity amulet, also not too interesting. Additionally, and various rings are going to be very necessary here. It helps just to bump the rarity up a ton. You don't really need Venter's Gambles because you have so many leftover points. The reason you have a ton of leftover points is because the increased rarity of items found can no longer roll on jewels. Now, that means you just have a ton of extra points on the tree that you were previously investing into just jewels that had rarity, and now all of those points are just going into defenses on the tree pretty much. We have Wonder Traps, and we are going low life by reserving Tempest Shield on our life. We have a string with rarity on it, and then of course Orsies. Last setup is going to be the same as last league. You have a Gold Flask for the rarity, Distillate for the rarity, Progenesis so you're immortal. Obviously this isn't necessary, but it helps. And then an Instant Life Flask for the recovery maps, as I mentioned before. Now the defenses on this character are just sky high. It has a fabulous 2 million EHP, even though it only has 2,000 unreserved life. Isn't that pretty cool? So with all of the extra points that we got from not having to path up to here for all of the rarity jewels, we have simply pathed over to the Templar area to get Glancing Blows, a bunch of block chance investment here. And if you'll notice, we are actually using Acrobatics on this build. You can spec Acrobatics, get a bunch of suppression on the tree, as well as Mage Bane, and fun fact, you can hit the spell dodge cap pretty easily. So this character is going to probably be block capped if you get a corruption, spell block chance capped, as well as spell dodge chance capped here as well. Additionally, it has Progenesis with Flask effect and Pet Blood. So yeah, the defenses on this are just sky high. This is probably going to be the tankiest character in the party if he's affected by all party buffs because of the Progenesis scaling. Now you might notice, because we're wearing a gavel here, what skill are we going to be culling with? And there are honestly a few choices, and I think the best option is going to be minions. We are converting another one of the builds to minions somehow. Basically what you can do is get Summon Skeleton of Mages with GMP, Fork, Return, Item Rarity, and Chance to Poison. Fork, Return, and GMP have tons of coverage, and the Skeleton Mages actually have a ton of prod speed already. And so this works out super nicely to cull with. Plus, they're automated because you just have to throw them down, and then the skeletons will just continue casting and poisoning stuff so that they'll die when they're low HP. You can replace this Chance to Poison with Culling Strike if you're having trouble with regen mobs. Just know that's an option. One thing to mention here is that the mages will summon fire spells, but you can block it because it is a prismatic spell. You can put a combat focus here to block fire. This will prevent ignites from happening, therefore enabling the culling condition on the Speaker's Wreath helmet. And then last thing to mention here is you can put a Fertile Mind here to convert all of this dex to int. This helps a lot with the attributes. Rest of the tree is just grabbing life, grabbing some chaos res over here on an anti-venom, and then you can grab any 12 passive or even 10 passive large here to help give you a bunch of max life and or strength. But yeah, this character is built like a brick. It has all of the rarity possible. It has the Cloak of Tamar Eiley for the extra blue items, and after everything, it has 979 rarity. That of course does not include specific mods like the 45 rarity on the helmet, which only applies to rare or unique enemies. And then also you're going to have an extra 200 on top of that because of the Glittering Scarab. That goes over most of the Culler, but there is one more topic about the Culler that we must go over first, and that of course is going to be tinctures. Now of course tinctures are making a return in 3.25, and you can use them by default with melee. There is a tincture mod here which is 31 to 40% increased rarity of items dropped by slain enemies. Now we don't know if this still exists in the game because they did say they are changing a lot of the tincture affixes, so this could completely just be removed. Who knows? They have added a lot of tincture effect to the tree, so if this rarity does exist, you can invest in some extra tincture effect here that I did not include. I'm going to be providing two BOBs for the Culler, one of them that is using a tincture and the other one is not. There is one other thing to mention about these tinctures, and that it is I don't think it's worth going until you get a Forbidden Flesh and Flame and allocating Seasoned Hunter from Warden, because this allows you to use a ranged weapon. This of course would let you put on Wind Ripper, which is a little bit less rarity than the Gavel, but because you can put on a tincture with rarity and then get a whole bunch of tincture effect on the tree from wheels like this as well as nodes like this, you do gain a substantial amount of rarity back. And then of course you'd use the traditional Scourge, Arrow of Menace, Clear setup that you were using with old Windripper culling setups. Anyways, that's enough about the Culler. Last build to talk about in the 6-man composition is going to be the Miner support, of course. If you're unfamiliar with the Miner support, there is a debuff on Stormblast Mine, as well as a debuff on High Impact Mine that provides double damage, as well as 150% increased damage taken with the Stormblast Mine. And that's simply it. Your goal is to just cap those 2 debuffs and a little bit of extra utility on top. So the main change here is that Master of Command no longer gives you aura effect on the enemy, which means you cut a lot of increased aura effect here on the clusters. You instead grab more aura effect on the tree here that you weren't pathing to before. This lets you cap out your Stormblast and High Impact Mine at 150 as well as the 100 double damage base. You do this by tossing 9 Stormblast Mines as well as 15 Portal Mines here. So you've got your 2 most important debuffs stacked, and then you can jam additional utility onto your character in the form of Aspect of the Spider, of course. You're using the Torrent's Reclamation to give everybody extra action speed from the Harbinger of Time. You have a Timeless Jewel here with Supreme Ostentation in order to enable the usage of the chess piece. The chess piece here, Garb of the Ephemeral, is giving everybody critical strike immunity. This also helps with the action speed slows that you encounter while doing Delirium. It feels very, very good to have this chess piece on somebody. It's getting a ton of block here for free from this Duresso's Courage Shield. It's honestly just really OP. You can slap it on anybody, get capped block. Very, very good if you can just slap it on. And then past that, of course, you do need the flash setup I have shown on the other characters in order to be able to run less recovery maps as well as the altar mods. There isn't a whole lot else going on this character. You can jam additional utility on stuff like Shield or even Stormbind totems, but mainly your whole job here is to just cap the Stormblast Mine and to cap the Portal Mine with High Impact. Past that, any extra utility is a bonus. But yeah, that goes over all of the builds we're playing specifically in 6-man. I want to talk a little bit now about potential duo setups, and then after that, what you might want to play in 3, 4, or 5-man if you don't have a full 6-man party. Now, I am going to be putting out a duo BAMA POB, as well as an Aurabot, as well as another Aurabot that you can run with other characters that you can use the Hands of Phrygia gloves with. As I mentioned before, because BAMA is minions, you are unable to use the link gloves because you can't link to every minion to give them the buffs. So there's 2 Aurabots, one with the gloves and without the gloves. Now, BAMA might not be your cup of tea when it comes to duo skills. I do think it is very strong. I've put together a duo setup here that has right around 2 billion DPS. The gear here isn't anything crazy. It's very obtainable, maybe somewhere in the realm of like 50 to 80 divines. For 2 billion DPS, I think that's quite powerful. It's not as tanky as some other setups, but the damage is definitely there. There are some small adjustments here from the 6-man to the duo BAMA POB, even though the gear is going to be largely the same. First off, in a duo, it is absolutely not worth it to come down here to jam in the last large cluster jewel. You want to cut this section of the tree entirely and then use those leftover points to invest in additional defenses here. Additionally, you have a little bit of suppression investment here. You can to get more suppression on your gear and consider going a hybrid helmet here. You can get a large suppression roll. You also need to be summoning power charge gorillas for yourself, because normally the Culler is summoning those for you, but in a duo, you're going to have to do them yourself because of how OP power charges are on the minions. It's absolutely necessary to run those over the other utility specters. But those are kind of the main adjustments to the duo BAMA. You just cut a large wheel over here in favor for more personal defenses across the tree because there's a little bit more you have to fit in instead of just pure damage in a duo setup. Now let's talk about the duo Aurabot for this. Playing with minions, there is the main downside in that you can't use the link gloves. Next best thing, of course, is Valkyries. It's going to be built very similar to a 6-man Aurabot, but you're jamming a few additional things in here. First thing you want to jam in on your duo Aurabot that's separate from 6-man Aurabots is going to be Enduring Cry setup here. The Enduring Cry is going to be by far the best buff to give to your party in a duo. You don't really have the room to jam in more Warcry investment, and because you're an Aurabot, of course, you're very socket starved, so just adding a 1-link Enduring Cry here and getting 100% uptime on this buff, as well as giving everybody endurance charges, is going to be feeling very, very good. And in order to proc this, I do think it is a good decision to put on the Red Blade banner so that you can have full max regen on this. I do think it is worth it to cut 20 aura effect on this character in order to have a maximum power Enduring Cry. The regen really is just that OP. You can try this out. You can, of course, go back to Matua to Puna. They're both solid options, but I do think the regen is definitely worth investing into here. And regen before Warcry effect is no joke. One thing to mention about that regen is it is, of course, course, scaled by the Guardian recovery rate. So that 10% regen really might turn into something like 18, 19, or even 20% regen, which honestly is a fuck ton. So you can experiment around with this. You can put on the red blade. I do think it is very much worth doing here. Additionally, you're dropping Defiance Banner for Flesh and Stone. I mentioned that on the duo Aurabot. You want to do the same thing here. Flesh and Stone is going to be a very, very nice defensive layer that you didn't have before. It does compensate for the loss of evasion and armor that you lost from Defiance Banner. The Blessing setup is going to be, of course, different because you're not using March of the Legion. You're going to be putting on Bubonics for the extra RMR. And then, of course, with the Dark Marionettes returning from Affliction, you can simply just use Dark Marionettes to cast your last Blessing here. And because you're not culling, you don't need to worry about any of the damage that these are dealing. And so it is a much, much more convenient option for duos and or trios that aren't culling. Last thing you want to do that differentiates itself from a 6-man setup is trying to fit in a Stormblast Mine setup. It simply just takes a 2-link in the form of a Stormblast Mine and a Minefield, and this is enough to give you that 150% increased damage taken. This is honestly just so much damage, it is something you shouldn't pass up. It is a little bit clunky to toss the mines, but holy fuck, when you toss those mines out, does everything just explode. A lot of buttons on this build, a lot of stuff to keep up, but if you want to extract all of that power from the build, it is definitely worth it to jam this 2-link on here. It will skyrocket your damage. And those are kind of the main differences between 2-man Aurabots and 6-man Aurabots. You try to fit in some of the most powerful buffs that you don't have from all of those other characters. On top of this duo Aurabot POB I'm putting out, I'm also going to be putting out a version that, of course, uses the new Necropolis gloves, Hands of Frisia. If you're not playing a minion build, you should absolutely be putting these gloves on. It is just the best in slot Aurabot gloves. And honestly, these gloves are almost a huge incentive to not play minions. So if you're supporting anybody else except for minions, go Hands of Frisia. A lot of the same principles as before in that we're trying to put on a red blade banner for the maximum war cry. We're investing into Stormblast Mines so we get the huge increased damage taken. But the main difference here is that we're going to be supporting our carry with a Censure of Benevolence, which is giving all of these flasks over to him. Additionally, he's going to be getting all of the aura effect from the gloves here. These builds don't have a ton of differences to them. It's mainly rotating around the gloves and the belt and some gem socket changes, but it depends on what you're supporting. It's a good segue into our next topic, which is going to be what you want to play if you're playing in like a 3-man, 4-man, or 5-man. I want to first suggest a couple options for duos. So I am, of course, putting out a BAMA POB, which is my build, something that I've created and I feel really comfortable recommending just because of how much damage that thing can pump out. I think it is absolutely super strong. There are a lot of other builds, however, that you can play with Aurabots, of course. This is one I want to shout out, somebody named Haloplasm. He does a lot of like duo specific Aurabot and carry builds. They're much more new player friendly than what I put out. So I definitely highly recommend checking out Haloplasm if you want like a duo specific setup. He's going to be putting out a video, I'm sure, in the next day or two, updating a lot of the builds for new patch. So please check him out. He's a really chill guy. But in principle, you can play Aurabot with any number of builds. You can even, in fact, take any one of the new 25 Lightning Strike carry POBs I've seen from literally everybody under the sun playing this build and just take off all of the reservation stuff and play it with an Aurabot. I'm sure that will work just fine. Additionally, other popular options like Penance Brand and or Spark, I'm sure are still very, very strong options on the new patch. They just simply lost damage from Hatred, but honestly, everybody lost damage from Hatred, so it's kind of a wash right now. As for 3-man setups, I am going to confidently recommend that you guys play this new Warcry support. This character does so much more than a Mana Guardian, it is insane. The power that is brought simply by Spectres with the proximity shields cannot be overstated, and then on top of that, all of these buffs that this character provides, on top of all the damage reduction you get from endurance charges, on top of the fizz to Ellie you get from the belt, on top of the curses, it just does everything. Not even mentioning the Fortify. I highly recommend considering playing this over a Mana Guardian. It's going to do a lot more for your defenses than a Mana Guardian will. Of course, if you're adding a 4th person to your party, you definitely want to consider either adding a Mana Guardian or you can add a Culler depending on what your team dynamics are. I think if you do have this Crybot in your group, you can absolutely safely add a Culler to a lot of content. I don't know that it'll be enough to do the craziest T17s, but it'll most surely be able to do anything below that. So you can kind of choose whether or not you want to add the Mana Guardian for the more power, but in this case, you probably are looking to add a little bit of MF onto your carry with like a Headhunter or something like that, and then as your 5th, you could add a Culler. That's also an alternative. So character slots 4 and 5 are going to be a choice between Mana Guardian and then your Culler here. And then last but not least, if you do have a 6th person in the party, you're just going to be adding a Miner. This is just a huge multiplier to your damage, and it just rounds out your 6-man comp. Last topic we need to go over is what everybody is going to be leveling as and how we are all going to be leveling these characters for League Start. So for the BAMA carry, we'll start there. I unfortunately do not have the leveling of this character fully fleshed out from level 1 to, level 100, of course. And so we are going to be doing a full respec into this character when we have some bits and pieces of the gear. I think the main things you're looking out for in order to start this BAMA build is going to be, of course, the bow. Once you got the bow and the chest, you can honestly look for these cluster jewels. 99% of the power of this build comes out of the cluster jewels and the timeless jewels, so you really want to try and get these jewels as well as the timeless jewel before you try and put this build together. The multi-jewels do help out a ton, so consider delaying your swap until you can afford these jewels as well. The rest of the gear should be pretty cheap, and the Strangle Grasp is not really necessary when you're starting out. You can just manually path to the damage nodes on your timeless jewel. This just helps you save points. You can use any generic rare amulet with minion stats before then. The build we're going to be playing to level this initially is going to be Jung Roan's Archmage Trinity Detonate Dead. We're going to be playing this just to complete our Atlas, and then shortly after our Atlas is finished and we're ready to group up and farm, we're going to respec the character into this BAMA character. Next up is going to be leveling Aurabot. Now, I have a in-depth video on how exactly to level Aurabot. I go over all of the leveling stuff here, and this has really not changed from 2 years ago. I would go here and watch this video if you haven't. I go over a lot of the concepts of leveling in a group and how to level an Aurabot specifically, so start here if you're unfamiliar about how to level Aurabots. I'll include a link in the description if you want to go check out that video as well. Next up is, of course, going to be how we are leveling the Crybot here. Now, we are going to be leveling the Crybot as just simply Frostblade's melee, and then we're going to be doing somewhat of an early transition into a support when we obtain Tripanon. In the POB here, I have a bunch of leveling trees with the early progression. Essentially, it's just standard melee leveling with Frostblades. Pick up your best two-handed weapon, make sure you're keeping up in weapons, and the progression is all here. You can do any really form of duelist leveling that you want, because the respec here is going to be pretty easy. You're going to be staying in all the same sections of the tree, and I don't think the respec is going to be that costly no matter what you play, so really pick your duelist leveling of choice. We're just going Frostblades personally. You can follow along what we're doing here in the trees if you'd like. As for leveling the Mana Guardian, obviously it's not viable to level as a Mana Guardian, so we are of course playing another build and respecing later. The build we are choosing to level the Mana Guardian on this patch is going to be Ball Lightning of Orbiting. This is an Archmage build. It is very popular. There are a ton of different content creators that are talking about Archmage Hyro builds. You can really choose your favorite Archmage Hyro and just play one of those. We're going Ball Lightning of Orbiting, but there's a ton of options here because Hierophant is an extremely strong ascendancy on this patch. And because you're building a bunch of mana, your transition to Mana Guardian is going to be a little bit cheaper because you're getting mana on gear. So that's very nice there. Now, leveling the Culler is just a generic bow build. There are tons of bow resources, especially from last league. You can choose your favorite bow build of choice. We are going Rain of Arrows. I have trees in the POB here you can flip through, as well as different gear. You can choose to follow our POB or any bow POB if you'd like. And then when the party finally groups, you just respec to the normal culling tree. And then finally, as for leveling the miner support, we are going to be playing Hex Blast Mines. Hex Blast Mines is also a very explored archetype, and I would encourage you to look at other content creators for that, as we are also just simply copying other people for our Hex Blast leveling here. But yeah, guys, I think that about wraps up all of the build relevant discussion for the 325 patch here for group play. There is also going to be a similarly large video either sometime tonight or tomorrow that goes over Atlas. Obviously, the dynamics of group MFing and partying has changed with the removal of quantity, so there's quite a large discussion there. I'll try and get that video out as soon as I can for you guys. But yeah, if you have any questions about any of the builds or anything like that, you can always leave them in the comments. I try to answer as many people as I can. Once again, I'm Snap, and thanks for watching.